I'm Mary Che. I'm a council member and I represent Ward 3, but we come together today, on this day, on 9/11, to acknowledge the bravery, the courage, and the sacrifice of our first responders. And we join together to mourn the horrific loss of life on that day and the continued suffering and loss of life that that event has caused police, firefighters, EMT workers, and all others who have helped and have to struggle now with the environmental toxins and the physical and psychological scars left by the 9/11 tragedy. Before we begin the event, though, I would like to ask that you all join with me for a moment of silence. Thank you very much. As you know, we had to move the timing of this particular event because just this day there was a significant fire in my ward over at Van Ness, showing you that at any moment we call upon our first responders to help us. And we're blessed every day with those who stand ready to protect us, even to give their lives to protect us from harm. And 9/11 dramatically reminds us of the bravery and sacrifice of our first responders. Many of you have memories of that day, but for me, the iconic image was at the Twin Towers, where people were fleeing the doomed building, you may remember, many, of course, for their lives, while the first responders were racing in, running, as they must have perceived, at the risk of their own lives. And we know that every day we're covered by this blanket of security that you provide, and we cannot thank you enough. And we must always bear witness to your sacrifice and service, and this we do here again today. So, to begin, at this time I'd like to call, please, Mayor Bowser to share her thoughts with us.
Thank you, Councilwoman Che. And I want to thank you, Councilmember Che, for bringing us together here as you've done for a number of years. And I think that it is a testament to your support of our first responders in so many ways that we gather here at this firehouse that serves so much of the downtown, including City Hall. I join with you also in acknowledging the men and women who protect us each and every day in our fire and emergency medical service and in the Metropolitan Police Department, those who take calls at our 911 call center, and all of those who work in our Homeland Security Agency to make sure that we are prepared for any threat that comes to our city. We are reminded on 9/11 that we are a particular target, and we know that responsibility weighs in the hearts and minds of our first responders each and every day. We go to work with the great confidence that we are prepared and we will respond. And more than that, we can counter threats against us because of the capacities that we have built. There has been great investment in our people, and we continue to make those investments each and every day. There have been great investments in our equipment, and we know that our first responders count on us to be there so that they have the best of the best. They have also called on us to make sure that leadership is always prepared to deploy them in the best, most effective, and most fair ways. And I am proud that we can count on our departments and say that we have done all of those things. We're also reminded on 9/11 that we had specific losses of D.C. residents, children, teachers, who were being rewarded for their great work at school and participating in a national event. Those children would be grown now, some missing college, missing weddings, missing the rest of their lives because of cowards. We remember them, and we shall never forget.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I'd like to now call on, please, the council members who are present with us. Others could not come, and so I'd like to call, please, Councilmember Allen to the podium.
Thank you, Councilmember Che, and good afternoon to everybody. Let me also thank Councilmember Che for this is something she's provided a lot of leadership on for many years, but I can tell you as the chair of the Judiciary Committee, she's been a really wonderful ally when we think about issues around health and safety and well-being for our first responders, so really grateful for your leadership with that. The mayor talked about 18 years ago. It's kind of hard. My wife and I were talking this morning about realizing that it was 18 years, and so today's college freshmen were born around this time. And I think we all remember exactly where we were on September 11th. I certainly do. But it's something that, while that sticks in my mind, recognizing the bravery and sacrifice that we see from so many is what will stick with all of us. I had the opportunity earlier this summer to go up to New York and was able to visit Engine 7 Ladder 1, which was the first house right down there in Lower Manhattan that responded, and listening to some of the men and women who were serving now, but recognizing that sacrifice. And then over my years here, I have gotten to know a lot of our first responders, and I'm always in awe of the sheer intensity that they bring to their job every day to help keep us safe, help respond, help be the one that runs into hazard's way when others are running away. And unfortunately, I've also had to see how, in the face of a loss, when someone of our first responders has fallen, that same intensity, though, to wrap themselves around the family and the friends and help be that family and extended family now that helps support is just incredibly awe-inspiring. It's a testament to the will and the intensity that the men and women that serve our city bring every single day. So I, on behalf of everybody else, incredibly grateful and thankful, and will never forget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. I'd like to now call upon, please, Councilmember Evans, Councilmember from Ward 2, and this is the fire station of his ward.
Thank you, Mary. And first of all, good afternoon to everyone, and it's a real honor and privilege to be here today to join with our mayor and Councilmember Allen and Councilmember Che. Again, I want to thank her because she's done such a great job over the years of bringing us all together here, and certainly to join with our fire chief and our police chief and all of the other people who are here today. I also want to recognize we have two ANC commissioners. John Fanning is the chairman of the ANC for this neighborhood, and Janice Farabee is the ANC commissioner for the firehouse, the single-member district. So thank you both for joining us here today. And in thinking back on 9/11 and the heroism that went on there, I was located in my office at 14th and Pennsylvania Avenue when it all began to unfold. The small plane perceived to have flown into the first building, which wasn't a small plane, and then the second plane, which really brought home what was happening, and then the Pentagon. And I always have to remind people, our fire department excelled that day. Not that they don't excel every day, but that was a day. And if anyone is still on the department who was there 18 years ago, our fire department was the first on the scene at the Pentagon and really took the lead in helping the people who were injured and killed there, as well as to putting out the fire. And so I commend all of the people, all the individuals who were involved during that time period. As we go forward, it's very critical that we support our firefighters and police officers and all of our emergency personnel in the District of Columbia. They perform an enormously important job. And I have a particular affinity for firehouses. My dad was a firefighter. In upstate Pennsylvania, we had volunteer firefighters is what it was. And so the volunteers would go to the firehouses, and I have a particular affinity for firehouses because I seem to remember having spent most of my time when I was like 10, 11, 12 on Friday nights in a firehouse, as my dad was there. And the poles, I used to be able to climb up that thing, not only slide down it, but up it. I don't think I could do it today, but I was pretty good at sliding down it. And The other positive effects, I learned to play poker, watching everybody play poker at the firehouse, and I won't go beyond that, what else I learned at the firehouse. But it was always, in seriousness, very memorable times, and I have a tremendous appreciation for what firefighters do for all of us. So, again, it's an honor and pleasure to be here today, and you always have my support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Evans. I'd like to now introduce, please, the Fire Union President, Dabney Hudson, for a few remarks.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Che and Mayor Bowser. This is now the 18th year that we've done this here at Engine 16, and Councilmember Che also takes time out of her day to go around to each fire station in her ward and hand out various and sundry treats, sometimes cupcakes, sometimes fruit. Some are liked a little more than others, but we really appreciate your continued support of all the men and women in the fire department. It's no secret, September 11, 2001, the department was in a tough spot. We had many of the members or people that are sitting in this room today were en route to the Pentagon to help with the efforts there to try and put out the fires and pull everybody out. The department was in a tough time there. We didn't have all the tools and resources we needed. We had people, we'd done a full department callback, and we had people sitting in fire stations with no way to get to the Pentagon. That was 18 years ago, and we've come a long way with the continued commitment from the mayor, from the council, from everybody sitting here to make sure that the men and women of this department are equipped with the most modern, most up-to-date apparatus and equipment that we can to respond to the large volume of calls we do on a daily basis. So I'd like to thank both of you and the council member and everybody here for that. And additionally, we've gone above and beyond. Everybody knows there's a bunch of occupational diseases that we're finding are coming out of the September 11th, and cancers and other problems that are plaguing our members. And through the help of the council, through the help of the mayor and everybody here, we've been able to fund a presumptive bill that takes care of our members even when they're sick, so they don't have to worry about getting a paycheck or how they're going to get time off when they've been stricken with cancers. And luckily, we don't have too many people that have had to take that, utilize that benefit. But were it not for the continued support of everybody sitting in this room today, we wouldn't have that. So I'll end on this. A lot of people like to talk the talk, but everybody sitting up here is definitely walking the walk with the men and the women, the fire department. And we thank everybody here for that. Thank you.
At this time, I'm going to call on Police Chief Newsham to make a few remarks, and then I've saved for the last Chief Dean, because we have some presentation of resolutions and something from the mayor as well. And so he will be the last speaker, though there'll be one little more further aspect, speaking of cupcakes, before we actually conclude. So at this time, Chief Newsham, please.
I didn't know there was going to be cupcakes.
Not for you.
Oh. Well, good morning. Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Thank you, Councilmember Che, Councilmember Allen, and Councilmember Evans. For you to hold this event and for you to all show up means a lot to our first responders. They really appreciate it. I definitely want to thank and acknowledge the many first responders that are in attendance today and that work every day to ensure our community is safe. 18 years ago today, our nation was ambushed in a way that we will never forget. Our memories and the images from that day will forever be etched in our hearts and minds. When I reflect on that tragic day, I can't help but remember the selfless sacrifice by so many. On that day, 18 years ago, first responders dropped their breakfast, left their families, listened to radio transmissions, and raced to incident scenes in New York, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and just across the river at the Pentagon. And they did it without hesitation. For some, that was the last day they would see their family, and for others, it was the beginning of a grueling and dangerous recovery mission. At the end of the day, 343 New York City firefighters and paramedics, 23 New York City Police Department officers, 37 Port Authority officers, and 11 officers from other jurisdictions were killed in the line of duty. Hundreds of law enforcement and fire service members have suffered and are suffering from illnesses linked to the recovery, many of whom have since passed away. 125 civilians and military personnel were killed at the Pentagon, and nearly 3,000 civilians perished in the towers and the 4 airplanes that crashed that day. We also can't forget the members of our military who have lost their lives on this war on terrorism in our country. I know we had a moment of silence earlier, but if you will forgive me, I think it's appropriate to have another at this point. Our first responders answer the call for thousands of emergency incidents every year, each one bringing unique and often challenging circumstances. Watching our first responders here in the district, I am confident on that day in September of 2001, when those first responders arrived on the scene, jumped out of their patrol cars, climbed down from their fire apparatus. They knew they were vulnerable and in immense danger. But they did what they do, and they proceeded ahead anyway, many of them with the understanding that they wouldn't come out. This is the meaning of sacrifice and the epitome of selflessness. So on a day that we gather to honor their service and to recognize the first responder community, we should tell their story and reflect on their courage. We cannot and will not let their legacies fade, and will instead choose to use this day as a symbol of resiliency. A reminder that DC's first responder community will continue to serve our residents, our visitors in the nation's capital at times of crisis. And whenever called upon, we will do it without hesitation, just like our brothers and sisters did on September 11th of 2001. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. And so at this time, I'd like to have the presentation of the resolution on behalf of the mayor. Mayor, do you have something that you're reading or not? Oh, okay, fine. So then we'll just move to the council's resolution. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to share the honor with the mayor and any council members who are here. I'd like to read the whereas clauses of this resolution because I think it's important to have them in front of us. And so, Councilmember Allen and Evans, if you would come forward and we can start reading.
Are we taking turns?
Yeah, take turn. You're first.
Okay.
Anybody
Okay.
can be first.
All right. Thank you. Okay. The resolution begins as follows. Whereas on the occasion of the 18th anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States, the Council of the District of Columbia honors the memory of the nearly 3,000 people who perished from the attack, including 12 victims from the District of Columbia.
And whereas an exceptionally courageous force of first responders, including more than 100,000 firefighters, paramedics, rescue and recovery workers, and police officers across the country risked their lives that day to save the lives of others.
Whereas the brave District Fire and EMS Department, which along with the Arlington County Fire Department and other local fire agencies helped with the Pentagon recovery efforts on September 11, 2001, whereas the men and women who serve as first responders in the District of Columbia carry out the extraordinary responsibility of protecting not only district residents but all who visit and work here and have always done so with tremendous dedication and respect.
Whereas the men and women of the district's emergency services have fulfilled every duty to the district and their country in an honorable, courageous, and timely fashion, and they have demonstrated immense compassion for those who have suffered unforeseeable tragedies, while routinely considering the safety and well-being of others before their own.
And whereas nationally thousands of first responders have suffered adverse physical and emotional effects in the 18 years since 2001, and even now are at significantly greater risk for developing occupational cancers due to their exposure to chemicals and debris from the attacks.
And Mayor Bowser was a council member for 8 years. And so I've asked her to read some of these clauses as well, and she can close it out for us. Mayor, starting at the top.
And whereas the Council acknowledges that there is more work to be done to support our first responders and to ensure that our men and women are suitably cared for and compensated for their brave work defending the district, our country, and ideals. And where it is fully right and just to honor the memory of those who lost their lives in the terrorist attacks nearly 2 decades ago, and it is equally compelling to observe and pay our respects to the first responders of the district for their bravery and selflessness in the face of extraordinarily trying circumstances. And the Council has resolved.
Mary, why don't you resolve?
I'm going to resolve. Okay. Resolved by the Council of the District of Columbia that this resolution be cited as the September 11th Emergency and First Responders Remembrance and Recognition Resolution of 2019. The Council of the District of Columbia honors its first responders for their tremendous commitment to serving the district and remembers emergency workers who dutifully served their country in the face of danger on September 11th, 2001. And this resolution will go into effect as soon as the date is published in the District of Columbia Register. And now at this time, I'd like to present this resolution to Fire Chief Dean and ask him if he would make a few remarks. But first, the presentation.
Here you are. Get a picture. I'm going to move over that way. This thing is not in the middle.
Okay, hold on.
Well, thank you. I thought I had done all my sweating this morning at the fire, but the best thing I learned today was that the lieutenant told me, "Chief, you're sweating." I looked at him and noticed that he did not have on this big, heavy coat like I do. Thank you, Mayor Bowser and Councilmember Che, for taking the time and effort to recognize the brave men and women of the D.C. Fire and EMS Department on this somber day. We're also gratefully joined by a number of dignitaries. Councilmember Allen, Councilmember Evans, you got all the council members. I got my public safety partner, though, who's really important to me, Chief Newsham. Together, I think we do a very good job. Again, Dabney Hudson, thank you very much for being here. And my deputy mayor, Kevin Donahue, is here also. So thank you for joining us. Today marks 18 years since the heroic attacks played out on 9/11 in New York City, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and right here, just across the Potomac River at the Pentagon. As the tragic events of that day unfolded, the image of first responders racing to the scene are forever etched in our minds. Among them were many of our members who responded to the Pentagon, doing all that they could to beat back the flames and save lives. Those first responders did not flinch. They did not hesitate, and 343 paid the ultimate sacrifice that day. Sadly, that tragic toll continues to grow as more and more public safety personnel continue to die from 9/11 related illnesses. 9/11 forever changed our lives. What it did not change, and only served to magnify, is the daily sacrifice of our firefighters, EMS personnel, and their families. Our members answered hundreds of calls for help daily, all because they stand ready to help, just as those thousands of first responders did 18 years ago. So while we remember those who perished on that tragic day in American history 18 years ago, and those who continue to do so from 9/11 related diseases and illnesses, I also want to acknowledge the D.C. Fire and EMS members that have followed in those heroes' footsteps. We will never forget. Thank you.
And now I have one last duty to perform here, and then the event will conclude. This is the part where I have the most fun. And Abigail, could you come forward? We have a token here for the members of the firehouse, and we're not going to insist that we get some, but I wouldn't turn it back. In any event, we'd like to present this token of our gratitude to our firefighters in this house, and hope that they enjoy it. But again, I understand it's a token, but it's symbolic of all of the affection that we share with our first responders. So thank you all for coming. We appreciate it, and please always keep this in your hearts. Thank you.